All right. Just when you thought we couldn't have any more brain, we have more brain. And we have some spinal cord thrown in there as well. So, not really function of brain, just, or not really what's going on in the brain so much as just how the brain is protected. There is a covering of the brain called the meninges, and there are several layers of the meninges. You can see here that it's pretty thick. You don't need to know. So this is the bone, and under here is the meninges, really thick and tough material. You don't need to know all those different layers. You just need to know that there's a thing called the meninges, and it covers and protects the central spinal or the central nervous system. It protects all the blood vessels. It encloses all the cavities. It forms different partitions in the skull as well. It contains that cerebral spinal fluid, which we'll talk about in a moment. You've probably heard of something called meningitis before. This is an inflammation of the meninges. And meningitis is particularly dangerous, obviously because it is near the brain. And it can spread to the rest of the CNS. It can lead to inflammation of the brain itself, which is known as encephalitis. And so that can be particularly dangerous. It's usually observed, are usually diagnosed by observing um, microbes from the cerebral spinal fluid. And so they'll typically like take a puncture of your lower back and kind of get into there and get some of that spinal fluid out and look, which can be painful. But meningitis is a particularly bad disease. All right, cerebral spinal fluid. Let's talk about this. This is basically liquid that is in the central nervous system, that is inside of these meninges that I just mentioned, and it provides a cushion for the brain, like a constant volume around the brain, almost like the brain is and the spinal cord are kind of floating in it. Gives buoyancy to those structures. It reduces the brain quite a bit, or the weight of the brain quite a bit. Just think of when you're in water, you're able to do more things than if you're not. Like you can do a backflip in the water, and you can't do one not in water. So the brain is reduced or the weight of the brain is reduced quite a bit just by being floating in this cerebral spinal fluid. Um, Protects the brain from blows and other trauma. It also nourishes the brain. It carries chemical signals to and from the brain, and so it's a very important function for cerebral spinal fluid. So, off the brain into the spinal cord, just a few things here. So, spinal cord is enclosed by the vertebral column. We've talked about the vertebral column. Remember the vertebral foramen? It's that tube that the spinal cord is running down. It begins all the way up here at the foramen magnum, that hole at the base of the skull, and runs to about L1 or L2, as you can see here. And past L1 and L2, you have all these other these like root nerves that come off and go to the rest of the vertebra. How does the spinal cord function? And here's another picture of that too. Just go back to that. How does it function? Basically provides a two-way communication from the brain to the body. It is like that highway that connects the brain to the rest of the body. It is a major reflex center as well. Reflexes are initiated and completed at the spinal cord. So the best way to think about this is the spinal cord does the thinking on reflexes. We're actually going to talk about this in the next unit more specifically, but reflexes are integrated in the spinal cord. A little bit about the actual spinal cord itself. So it's protected by bone. It's protected by the meninges, cerebral spinal fluid. They're from the spinal cord or all of these spinal nerves. There are 31 pairs of these spinal nerves that come off of it, and each one is going to a particular area of the body. And if you look at a cross section here of the spinal cord, you can see that the spinal cord basically has these two sections to it that are separated by this groove down the middle, almost divided into left and right halves, but it's kind of like this crescent shaped structure that has this groove running down the middle and has this characteristic butterfly there in the middle at its core, this gray matter at its core, and the white matter surrounding that. And this whole thing, again, is filled with cerebral spinal fluid in order to protect the spinal cord. There's not a whole lot extra. I mean, this is, of course, the spinal cord, you could spend your entire career just learning its ins and outs, but we're not going to get into a whole lot of this because it can get wild and crazy really fast. And so the big idea for the spinal cord is just understanding that it serves as this go-between from the body and the rest of your body, and the nerves there, and the brain, which is doing the thinking for the rest of the body.